Why do people abuse children? Because they can. I'm a former prosecutor and I specialized in child SA crimes. I was also forensically trained. This was in Detroit and over 19 years ago. And I want to talk about my experiences as it relates to the Daystar allegations. So in my experience, which was over 19 years ago, I was required to be trained in how to forensically interview a child victim. Many jurisdictions do it a different way, where they have special victims advocates that are trained and they videotape those sessions with the child. We had that as well, and they probably do still. But again, I don't work there anymore and I don't know how they do it. But in my experience, when I worked in Detroit, I was also required to interview children. I have taken countless children to court. These children would testify in open court in front of their abusers. And a lot of times there was no corroborating evidence. A lot of times it was just their word. I can't say happy to say, but I am actually pleased, if I can use that word, to see that people are getting more aware about this subject. 19 plus years ago, we didn't have YouTube, we didn't have social media. And quite honestly, within our prosecutor's office, a lot of other attorneys who are in different units kind of looked at the SA unit differently. They thought we were different. And that may be because it takes a certain stomach or heart or mind to be able to handle these cases. So just a little bit about me before I get into the points that I want to make. I am an attorney. I no longer practice criminal law. I'm located in Florida. And I have a wealth of information about my experiences as a child SA prosecutor. Where to start? A lot of times, when I would take a case, if a case came across my desk, I would start out with the forensic interview of the child, but I also had to talk to the family. A lot of times the family members didn't believe the child. And that's what we see here with Daystar. The Lamb family is divided. And unfortunately, it's a reality. It happens all the time. I have hundreds of stories about it. So in my current practice, as I said, I don't prosecute criminal. I'm not in the prosecutor's office anymore. I have my own practice. Actually, I have two partners and I'm in a different area of law. But I've been practicing for 25 years and I have a lot of experience interviewing witnesses, cross-examining witnesses, taking depositions. I've done this countless times. I've been to trials. I've had jury trials. I've had what you can refer to as a waiver trial or a bench trial, which is just in front of a judge. So I have to rely on my instinct. I have to rely on my experience when I'm determining whether someone is telling the truth or not. And you can talk to any attorney. This is what we do all day, every day. So that brings me to my first point about Daystar. I've watched several videos of Jonathan and Susie. I can't say I've watched them all, but I don't need to. The ones that I've watched, I'm convinced 100%. They're not lying. I particularly watched the mom because that's what I did when I was a prosecutor. I watched the mom. And I've watched Susie and even turned down the volume because when I do that, I can notice certain things about people's body language. Not that I'm a body language expert, it's just what I do in my regular course of my job. And she's 100% telling the truth. I really don't care if any of you disagree with that. That's not what I'm here for. I'm just sharing my experience. So going on that baseline, it brings me to the next point, which is the 5-year-old daughter. Why on earth would a mother victimize her child, her 5-year-old, in the way that Joni Lamb and Daystar want you to think that she's doing? She's not. She's telling the truth. No mother in their right mind would put their child through this. And you know what? This is a long road. In my experience, I do not anticipate that this is going to be resolved anytime soon. In my experience, I do not anticipate that Joni or anyone from Daystar is going to come off their high horse and admit their faults. It just doesn't happen. So I want to talk about what Susie reported, what Susie talks about, which is in the field of a prosecutor, we refer to as an outcry. An outcry is when a child, or any victim for that matter, they just spontaneously say something that could, that happened to them. In this case, based upon what I've reviewed, the outcry was of the particular act. I could be wrong, but I have not heard to date that there was an outcry on the identity of the person. Now hear me out. Everybody's talking about Pete. We know that there is somebody that they suspect. And it makes total sense because of the circumstances. In law, we talk about a totality of circumstances. And absolutely, I would agree. That's your guy. However, the child has not identified the perpetrator, to my knowledge. So, moving forward, what can they do? Going back to my experience when I was a prosecutor, the least amount of people talking to that child is your best situation. From what I've listened to and watched, it was Susie initially talking to the child, and then Joni came into the picture, bring the child to me, and she shut her up. And that was most unfortunate. Then there was this very confusing and chaotic ordeal of either Joni or Marcus or Daystar hiring on mental health practitioners, a forensic interviewer, and people are throwing around the term to exonerate Pete. I have no idea what they're talking about. Nobody could exonerate Pete. That has to be done by the police or a prosecutor. So, in my opinion, based upon what I've seen, the whole purpose of sending Susie and Johnny to Denise Boggs, I think it is, was just to appease them. That's just my opinion. To show them, oh, we're concerned, we're doing something about this. But nothing ever came of it. So it was really a nothing. It was just nothing. And then for Marcus and Joni to say that Pete was exonerated by those examiners, is that not a knife in the back of Susie and Jonathan? I don't know what is. You know, Susie's first instinct was to call the police, but it appears from what I've seen that Joni thwarted that. So that brings me to my second point. I see this so much. People know about, hear about an essay against a child. And I'm just going to put this in the context of the church because I'm quite tired of hearing this. And I am in no way disparaging anything about what Susie and Jonathan did at all. So do not hear what I'm not saying. What I am saying is all too often in the church, people go to their pastors or elders or even just somebody trusted in there and they tell them about these crimes. They're crimes. Instead of going to the police. Why? Why don't you go to the police? If you take nothing from this video, hear this. Stop going to your church when a child outcries and tells you about an essay. Go to the police. Stop talking to them. And remember what I said earlier. Limit the amount of people that talks to that child about that subject. As a prosecutor, that's where the defense would poke holes in my case. Luckily, the cases that I had, I just can't remember any that were significant where the child was talked to so many times that it just kind of ruined the credibility. But in most instances that I can recall, those children were taken to my office or the precinct until they were brought into my office for me to forensically interview the child. And then we leave it there. We don't keep talking to them and we instruct the parents and the family. Don't talk about this with them. We've taken care of it. Then we determine whether there's enough information to go forward against the perpetrator. So, in different jurisdictions, there's mandatory requirements to report. In Florida, there's general and there's professional. So when someone hears about it, just regular assault or SA, they're required to report it to, I think it's Child Services. I can't remember what the name of it here is, but a lot of times it's called Department of Child Services, or go to the police. You're required to do so. I think a lot of people just don't understand it, and I get it. But when something like this is everywhere, I hope that people are starting to understand and their eyes are starting to open why it's so important to bring the child right away to the police. Go to the police. You're not helping your child by not bringing them to the police. If you're not bringing them to the police, I have to question your motives. Objectively, why? Why are you not bringing them to the police? Again, I am not talking about or disparaging what Susie and Jonathan did. I'm just speaking in general because I hope that people realize it is very important to go to the police right away when a child outcries. A lot of times the child, it's delayed. They could be looking back years. That happened all the time. I had cases where the child was coming in for an interview and was now 12 years old. But it happened when they were 8. So they're looking back 4 years. There were times that I would have cases where I had a main victim. That is what the warrant was based on. The crimes were charged against the perpetrator with that particular victim. But then I would use other victims. We call it 404B witnesses, other acts witnesses, to show that this isn't a mistake. This person did it. It's a mode of operation. And I recall in one instance where the statute of limitations ran, and that is why we use that other person as a corroborating witness. Remember I said that a lot of these times we took these children to court and there was no DNA, there's no evidence, there's no video. These perpetrators that are doing this stuff, they're doing it in secret. They're not videotaping themselves, typically. We're gonna have some outliers, and if you watch the news, you probably know of one here in Florida, the Stephen Stearns case. And that's a different situation, because typically you just don't have that evidence. And you don't have the DNA. And another thing, because I've had this so many times, even if the child outcried right away and they bring them to the hospital, the type of SA may not deposit any DNA. So you're left with the child. And you think that the perpetrator is going to commit the crime on the child with somebody else witnessing it? Typically not. I've had cases where they have, and those witnesses were children. And so let me just circle back to a child witness and determining whether a child can be a witness. And that was something that the prosecutor would have to determine. And we did this by questioning the child to determine whether they could tell the difference between right and wrong. Not only were we building a rapport and speaking to them and just talking about their interests before we get into the heart of the matter and not using any leading questions, but before all that, we have to establish that they can tell the difference between right and wrong. Typically, a 5-year-old would be deemed incompetent. When we use the term incompetent, it just means that they're just not competent to testify. But I can recall a case where a 5-year-old was competent. She was very articulate. She was definitely smarter than the average 5-year-old. And she pointed the finger to her grandfather. And the outcry was what he did, when he did it, and who it was. That's what we're looking for when we're interviewing these children. The who, what, where. Who did it? What did they do it? When did they do it? And jurisdictionally, we have to figure out where it happened. These are difficult cases because children, they don't know the date. They don't have a calendar. They're not operating on that wavelength. So a lot of times what we do is we figure out what grade they were in, what season it was, or maybe a sibling's birthday, something like that. So there's so much I could say, but I wanted to make this short, and this is longer than I wanted it to be. I did want to bring up something that was disturbing. And I can't remember his name. I know the first name is Steve, and I think his last name starts with a W. I'm very bad with names. And he is a spokesperson for Daystar. And he came out with this ridiculous video slamming Laura Lynn Tyler Thompson, who is an incredible advocate for Susie and Jonathan and their daughter. There's a lot I could say about just the actions taken by Daystar. It's so troubling. They chose this man. It's laughable, and I have to laugh because I'm not making fun of this situation, but in my job, I have to laugh at certain things because if not, I'm going to go insane. Literally going to go insane because there's so many things that are unjust that we see, particularly against children. Why aren't people speaking up for them? I've seen it for decades, and I think it's just time. So let me get back to this guy. The arrogance, the contempt, the disdain on his face when he's accusing this wonderful individual for standing up for righteousness and speaking truth. It's disgusting. I want to throw up. It's beyond comprehension as to why they decided to do that. It's interesting to me. It's kind of funny. The video had no way to like it or lodge a comment. Why? Because they're cowards. That's what they are. They're cowards. That video was, they weren't playing hardball in that. They weren't even playing softball. He was throwing some wet paper towels. Flimsy, pathetic. So I just want to close with this. My point. I'm speaking to people in the church. If a child comes to you, or a parent who says, so-and-so said this, please give them good advice. Tell them to go to the police in the jurisdiction where the crime occurred. Don't wait. Don't talk to other people. Don't let anyone get in the way of your child. This is your child. If it is your child, do the right thing. Is there going to be a part 2 to this? Maybe. But I wanted to share this today. I wanted to share this now. So stay tuned.